Alrighty, welcome back. I cover rendering, or producing sort of a semi-photorealistic representation of what our work will look like once it's executed in real life. So we're picking up with the plumeria flower right where we left off. Before we dive into rendering, I'm going to just go through the chronology of what happened here, what lives on what layer, what commands we used. This is going to be a really brief summary, but I just want to remind everyone how we got to where we're at. So I'm going to turn off the visibility of everything except for the picture layer, and we'll kind of go through this file in the same order that it was created. So we first found an image online of something we wanted to be our inspiration for this particular design. We used the picture command to drop this image on the picture layer. We used the scale command to change its size to approximately what we were after. We then used some sort of curve tool. I like interpolate curve. That's this one here. To do a tracing. We made sure to take advantage of snaps so that we did not have any open sections. Everything was properly closed, and that's going to make our life easier in the future. So it looks good visually. Every part is kind of defined. We know that these are going to be our light parts. These are going to be our dark parts. These are the dividing lines between those two pieces of material, whatever they may be. However, these I would probably benefit from locking the picture layer so I'm not accidentally selecting it. These curves here are sort of disparate and broken up, and they're not ready to be disassembled yet. So this is where the curve boolean command comes in. Well, first I'll mention we applied a number to every single component, and those numbers want to live on the numbers layer, not surprisingly. We use the text command for that, not text object. We applied some grain orientation lines. For this design, I opted to say that, the grain should be flowing from the center of the flower outward. And we decided these pieces were going to be metal, so I didn't bother with grain orientation lines on them. But any piece of wood should have grain orientation lines. I'll go ahead and leave numbers and grain orientation on. We'll go ahead and turn on the parts layers, and we'll see what we produced with the curve boolean command. We're going to go from these disparate broken lines to nice components, parts that are closed curves. They're ready to be sort of disassembled and treated as objects, if you will. So I'm going to turn on the parts parent layer. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the image. I'm also going to turn off tracing. It's helpful to note that you cannot turn off the visibility of the active layer. So I'm going to make parts active, turn off the visibility of tracing. Okay, so there we have some parts. Notice how these curves now are closed curves. They're all joined, and everything is, the curve boolean command is a lot of commands in one. It does everything that we need it to do. Now we'll check out these parts. So we're good to go. We've got all of our parts sort of made and living on their corresponding parts layers. So having thought about this design a little bit more, I'm actually catching a little bit of a problem here. Our light parts, if I'm ever wondering what layer something is on, I can always select it and observe right down here. That lives on the parts light layer. So it sort of lives under this parent layer on the light layer. I decided that I wanted these petals to be the dark parts actually. These are going to be walnut all said and done. And the dark parts, if I turn them on, those are actually going to be copper. So I'm actually going to consider them to be light parts. So in the interest of keeping things organized here, which I'm always interested in, I actually need to switch these layers. I could go ahead and change the name of the layer. I think what I'm going to do instead is simply right-click on the dark parts layer. Select objects is going to select all the dark parts that live on that layer that I just right-clicked. I'm going to right-click on the light parts layer, change object to layer. This is a handy skill anytime you find you've put something on the wrong layer. So they disappeared. However, now they all live on the light parts layer. And now I can come in and just hold shift, select my dark parts, and you guessed it, I will right-click on the dark parts layer, change object layer. I'm already sick of the fact that all of my parts are in green, so I'm going to just differentiate these by changing the color. I'm going to just change my dark parts to red. Don't let this disturb you, the fact that the red line appears, it seems to disappear. It's under there. Anytime you make a selection and you see this pop up, this is Rhino telling you that you're really clicking on two things, and it wants to make you select which one you actually want. Another reason why it's helpful to have the color there. You can look at this color and go, yeah, I'm trying to select the dark part. You can also just observe the one that's being highlighted or not there. So once we had all these parts made, we went ahead and selected this, used the copy command, right-click to exit the command. Notice how I did not drag that stuff away. I made a copy of it over here. This is the copy that we're going to take apart. This is the master that I'm going to leave right where it was made, on top of the image, on top of the tracing layer. So don't be taking this stuff away. I'm then going to make another copy. If you recall, this is the copy that we sort of disassembled. It's pretty handy to turn off one of the parts layers. Come in and select the curve that defines the part, hold shift, its grain line orientation, and its number, and then that is something you're going to take away. I didn't really need to make a copy of that. I just tapped the Alt key, and that's a quick and easy way to make a copy. I'm all set up with the way I've made copies here. This is going to be my key that's going to help me assemble this thing after the fact. Let me just go ahead and show you the print layer. Alright, I should move this stuff out of the way. So if you recall, we took all of our parts, we separated them into sort of piles of, here are our dark parts. Each one of these is a group, using the group command of the cut line itself, the number, and the grain orientation line, and we were sure to not let any of these things scoot around or get distorted. So put all the dark parts into a group, put all the light parts into a group, and then kept a master. So to tie back in over here, this becomes this. This gets disassembled and broken into its components by species. And I'm a pretty big fan of, on my paper layer, just having the printable surface of a standard sheet of paper. This is 7.5 by 10. And I got this stuff over here simply by, once this is all disassembled and it looks a little bit more like this, select everything, right-click the print layer, change objects to layer. And this is important because it's going to give me the ability, once all is said and done and I'm ready to print my pattern and go to work on this thing in the real world, I can just turn off the visibility of everything else and do a Control P or type in the word print and hit enter. And now I'm ready to print. Oh, I just realized I actually don't care to print this this line here. This is just to kind of help me organize where my parts are going to be laid out. So I'll cancel that, turn off the paper, hit print, and it's always a good idea to be sure that you're printing at a 1-to-1 scale. Otherwise you'll be printing your design at a different size, and that can be catastrophic if you intended your inlay to fit on the width of a fretboard or on a particular piece of furniture, or if you intended it to fit in with some other inlay or feature. Alright, so that is where we left off with this file. Really quickly, I'm going to show you the end goal. If you're wondering what I'm doing there on the keyboard to see everything that's open on my computer, I'm just holding down Alt and hitting Tab on a PC anyway. There's a similar command for Mac. So this is a render. I will tell you in this video, I'm going to show you two different ways of doing a render. First, I'm going to show you the much more involved, it's more sophisticated, it's more difficult, it's also more accurate. I'm going to show you a more involved method and sort of recommend that you consider trying it at least once. It's a great way to know exactly, right down to the exact same piece of wood. You will know exactly what your inlay is going to look like all said and done if you follow your own plan. After that, just to give you another option, I'm going to show you the really sort of easy cheating way to do it. You may be able to tell that this one here was done the easy sort of cheating way. You'll notice this grain looks a little bit interesting for how small this part actually is. It's sort of copied around here. With all that talk of grain lines and which way they're going to flow, this image is not respectful of that design philosophy. I'm not going to sweat it. In the interest of making the rendering easier to do for this kind of easy option number 2, we're not going to concern ourselves with the fact that this isn't amazingly photorealistic. We're just going to go for it. So again, I'm going to show you the hard way first. Don't get discouraged if you really can't stand it. We're going to show the easy way second. We're ready to take advantage of our surface parent layer. I'm going to open it up. I went ahead and took the time to name my sort of subsurfaces. I've got light surfaces that corresponds with dark surface, or light parts. Dark surfaces that corresponds with dark parts. And we're going to talk about background a little bit more, but that corresponds to the background in the parts layer. So here's what I need to do. I've taken just a cell phone picture of the stock I actually plan to use for this. So I have my piece of walnut, my piece of copper, and a piece of purple heart that's going to be the background. You'll notice how I put that into the layer name just to kind of keep myself honest and keep track of what's going on here. So I just laid that piece of stock on my bench, laid a ruler right next to it, and just took a cell phone picture of it from directly above. I'm now going to repeat the same command that we used to drop this image, only I'm just going to go find the image that I took with my cell phone, emailed it to myself, downloaded it, and I want to drop it on its corresponding surface layer. It's very important that that goes to the surface layer. So I'll make surfaces visible. I'm going to make the copper or light surfaces active, and I'm going to enter the picture command. So copper stock, that's the one that I took the picture of. I'm getting ready to drop it on the copper layer. This is all making sense. I'm going to select that. Rhino is going to tell me where to drop the picture. I'm just going to kind of go off to the side here, and I don't really care about how big I'm going to drop this because I'm going to scale it to be the actual size of my stock. That's why I took a picture of a ruler right next to it. So I'll just drop that. We'll worry about scaling in a moment. Now I'm going to make the dark surfaces layer active. I can right click to get into the picture command again. That's the last command I ran. Dark is walnut, so yep, I'll go find my walnut stock. Same thing. Drop that image. I'm not worried about size at this point. And while we're at it, I'm going to go ahead and drop my background also. And that is purple heart, and I also took a picture of it next to a ruler. So I've dropped all these. Now it's time to make them the right size. So I'm going to select my image. This ruler is really going to come in handy. I'm going to select the image. I'm going to enter the scale command. I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to click as close as I can to where I feel like the 0 on that ruler is. Right about there should be good. And here's another easy to see number. Notice how I'm clicking from 0 to 4 on the ruler in real life. Now that I've sort of grabbed those 2 points, I can simply type in the number 4 and hit enter. So I got pretty lucky when I first dropped it. It didn't change size very much. Okay, so did that work? I'm not sure. Let's go ahead and confirm. Distance command, just typing in the word distance. I'm going to go try to measure those 2 points. From the 0 on the ruler to the 4 on the ruler, I'm getting 4 inches and 2 thousandths. That is perfect. That means my scale command worked, and now this is representative of the actual piece of copper that I possess, and it's the piece of copper that I'm going to use, so I'm happy with this. I'm going to do the same thing for the walnut. Select the image, enter the scale command, go and find my 0 on the ruler, find some other easy to see number. I'll just go ahead and go with the 3. So again, I grabbed it from 0 to 3. I'm just going to type in the number 3. Let's confirm that that worked. Using the distance command, measuring from 0 to 3 on the ruler. Bam, 3 inches, or close enough. Let's repeat that here. Select the image. You know, let's switch it up a little bit. Let's say you enter the scale command without selecting the image. Scale. The first thing it'll do is just say select the objects to scale. I'm only scaling one object, so now I need to hit enter or the right click key to let it know this is the only object I intend to run this command on. Now it's going to let me select my 2 points. Again, I'm just going to go 0 to whatever number is easy to see. We'll go to 3. I can see that okay. I've got it from 0 to 3. I'll type in 3. I hope it makes sense that if you wound up needing to click it from 0 to 1, you would simply type in a 1. If you grabbed it from 0 to 6, you'd type in a 6. Just to be rigorous here, let's confirm. I'm going to measure from 0 to 1, and I bet you it'll be within, a few thousandths. So 0.998, that is absolutely perfect for what we're going to be doing. So I now have actual images in Rhino of the materials I'm going to be making this inlay out of, and they're at scale now. This is actually in the Rhino space, inches. This is actually the size that it is in real life. So this is a pretty sweet thing that's going to happen here. So the magic is about to begin here. We're going to use these parts. We're just going to go ahead and use the ones on the print layer. What we're doing is typically something you would do before you set up a print layer, and that's going to give us the option to get really crazy about locating our parts on the stock, avoiding nasty spots, avoiding spots maybe you've already cut out, making the grain lines line up to exactly the features you want. This is going to give us crazy control over the inlay. So what we're about to do is pretty much in Rhino, we're going to simulate that which we're going to do in real life. So what we're going to do is just take these parts. I'm going to, if you recall, these are backups, so I only need one set. And I'm going to go ahead and just drag it near the edge of the copper. No grain lines to consider. I'm just going to work near the edge so I don't slice into too much of this. I don't waste too much of this piece of copper. I'm now going to take my group of walnut pieces, and I'm going to drag them over the walnut. So interestingly, this piece of stock, the grain is not even remotely parallel to its edges, so I'm just going to enter the rotate command. And just kind of eyeball it until I feel like my grain lines are parallel with the grain on the stock itself. So I like that pretty well. You can see how I could get pretty crazy about, oh man, I really like this wood over here, and I want to go ahead and move this part over there. If this was something really expensive or really rare, you only have one piece of it and it has to work and you want to really control the inlay, this is where you do that. You can plan out literally where the grain lines will wind up on your parts. So now that I've got this layout, I want to know this layout after the fact. So I'm going to move my background picture over here. I'm going to work with this later. I'm going to drag a selection box over everything that I just did. The surface that represents the stock that I actually possess in the scale that I actually possess it, so it's the right size here, and the parts that I just dropped on it in their current configuration, lining up grain lines with the actual grain of the stock, getting nutty about packing your pieces in here really close and taking advantage of the grain that you really like, maybe avoiding knots, or if it was a piece of pearl, maybe there's a dull spot that you want to not wind up with a part directly over. And I'm just going to drag a copy. I'm left clicking and holding, and I tapped the Alt key, get that little plus sign going on. I'm going to use this later to populate my print layer. So I'm ready to basically simulate the cutting of these parts out, and I'm going to use the trim command. Type in the word trim. It's going to ask me to select my cutting objects. This is a good opportunity to talk about an interesting selection technique. So I just changed my mind. I don't want to use the trim command. Hit the escape key, that will drop you out of the command. So I don't want to mess around with, oh man, am I selecting the surface? Am I selecting the part? I could go and turn off I could lock this picture layer. But I'm going to show you an interesting selection technique. I don't want to have to unlock it just to cut it. But if I were to lock it, I would stop selecting it, just like when we were tracing the image. If you drag a selection box from right to left, it will select anything that touches the boundary of that selection box. However, if I drag a selection box from left to right, so the opposite direction, it will only select objects that are fully contained within the box. So notice what happens if I fail to fully capture that end piece. I didn't get it. That can really save you some messing around, holding shift, trying to add things to the selection. Again, dragging the selection box from right to left. Anything that touches that box is getting selected. I could also hold Control and then click just the thing I want to deselect. That's an option. I am pretty fond of dragging a selection box from left to right, and that will select only objects within the box. Pretty handy if you can remember that. That will save you a lot of time in gaining a selection. So now I'm ready for the trim command. Select cutting objects, it says. Dragging a selection box from left to right, it's only going to select my my cut lines here from the print layer. I've selected them. Press enter when done. I can hit the right key also. Now it's saying select the object to trim. I'm just going to click out here in the waste. Bam. So we just made some parts that are exactly the right size, they're at the right scale, and now they actually have copper, the actual piece of copper that I possess. We're going to go ahead and repeat this with the walnut pieces. Enter the trim command. Trim. Select my cutting objects. I'll drag that selection box from left to right. Yep, that's looking good. I will right click to let it know those are the only cutting objects I want to use. Select object to trim. I'm going to trim out here. So this is really powerful what just happened here. We now basically have parts. This is really very much what we're going to be looking at once we saw all our pieces out. We've got our numbers, only we're seeing the actual material instead of the paper pattern, but we've got our numbers, and basically what we're going to do is emulate real life yet again, and we're going to assemble this thing on top of a pattern. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to turn on parts and grain orientation and numbers. I'm going to go ahead and lock the parts parent layer. That's going to keep me from accidentally selecting. I should go ahead and lock grain and numbers. That's going to keep me from accidentally selecting this stuff and moving it around. I really just wanted here to snap to so I can put this stuff back together. And now I'm going to take advantage of snaps. So O snap is turned on. End and near are probably going to be the ones that I want. Okay, part number 2. I know this is the center. Oh, you know, I skipped a step. This is going to get annoying if I have to deal with this. I want to keep this material. I want to go ahead and group these, so I did not mean to do that. I can hit Control Z. Another thing to keep in mind, if you ever start moving something and oh my gosh, I realize I left something behind. This is not what I want to do. I'm definitely never going to bother trying to set this back where it was. Just hit Escape. And that's like the forget about it kind of thing. You'll drop it back where you picked it up from. So if you ever realize something bad is happening in dragging or in a command, hit Escape, and it will either exit you out of that command or it will drop what you're doing. So I'm going to select this surface, this material surface, and the curve that cut it, and do the group command. So now I will not be able to drag that surface away. I'll be able to kind of assemble these quickly without any of this nonsense happening. Control Z, selection box. I can right click. Actually, no, I should type in the group command again. The right click will repeat the last command you did, which in my case there was undo. Group. 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 Just right clicking to repeat the last command that I did. Okay, I've got these in groups, and I'm ready to reassemble the flower. Again, it's going to be really annoying if you don't lock your parts layers and your numbers and grain orientation. Notice that, you know, I can probably go ahead and turn the picture off. I don't think that'll be helpful. Tracing is turned off. There's nothing over here that's available for selection. I'm going to appreciate that once I'm kind of moving and shaking here. Okay, so part number 2. I'm going to left click and hold right near this end. Notice that word end pop up. That's my end snap. And I grabbed it by its center, so I'm going to snap it to the center. Get into the rotate command. Center of rotation is going to be that common point that I just dropped. And now I'll rotate it and snap it up to its end. So I just dropped that part exactly where it came from. You have to recall that this piece was ultimately made from this material here, this stuff going on here, so it's not actually going to be too horrible. As long as I'm taking advantage of snaps and being careful with what I'm doing, it is not going to be too horrible to reassemble this whole thing. So I'm going to show you that one more time. Then we're going to kind of go to fast mode. Okay, part number 7. That's part number 7 right over here. I just need to grab it from some area that's a good thing to snap. I feel like this corner is going to be really nice to know that it lines up with that corner. Okay, so those 2 points are lined up. I will rotate. Center of rotation is that common point that I just chose. Rotate it into the middle. Never hesitate to zoom in just to make sure things are going well. I like it. We've got 2. I'm actually going to show you one more just to show you what to do. What if these parts were curved and I didn't have any nice ends to snap onto? That can get a little bit convoluted. However, I can take advantage of the grain orientation lines. Let's go ahead and put 5 in only by its grain orientation lines. Left click and hold by that grain orientation line. Bring it to a common point. Rotate command. Center of rotation is that very same common point. Snap to the end out here. Rotate it into position. Here we go. Now let's make this one step even nastier. So these pieces of copper don't have any grain orientation lines. Let's pretend that there was nothing good to snap on out here. I can snap to the number. I will do a move command. So I'm struggling a little bit to snap to that number. Point to move from, right here. So this is a common point here, snapping to that same corner. Rotate from here. This is a little bit convoluted. I'm zooming in really close, but Rhino is... Ooh, made it upside down. Hilarious. So let's fix that. In fact, I can probably rotate this 180 degrees now. I'll hold shift. Now I'll do a move. There's lots of ways of getting stuff done. Just really try to put the burden on Rhino. Make the snaps do the work for you as much as you possibly can. So I'm just going to repeat this until my whole design is sort of reassembled. Alright, that was not too bad at all. You know, I keep referring to this as the hard way, or I did refer to this as the hard way, and the easy way is the one I'm going to show you at the end of the video. To be honest with you, now that I'm really getting into this, I would say that this way is only slightly harder, not even twice as hard as doing it the way I'll show you next. And it's 10 times more accurate as a planning aid, and being true to life and really letting you know what you're going to be doing here. Conceivably, these decisions are going to be extremely important to me, which way the grain runs, avoiding nasty spots in my stock, that sort of thing. Also, what if someone is commissioning me to do an inlay into a piece of furniture that already exists, and they want to say on how big things are and where they go, and maybe this knothole is something that needs to be covered up, or this is damage, or something like that. So as a planning aid, I would recommend you go ahead and do it this way. And as far as easy way or hard way goes, I'll just mention that a true Rhino professional would probably be horrified at what we're doing here. Rhino is so powerful in the way that it renders. We're really just kind of cheating the system until it looks somewhat photorealistic. Rhino is capable of doing things like letting you design a building and then letting you choose a latitude and longitude, that is a location on the earth of that building, an altitude, so your elevation where you are on land, an orientation of the building in north, south, east, west, a time of year, the actual year itself, and a time of day, and Rhino will put the sun in the sky, and the sun will shine through the windows and cast shadows on the wall, true to how life is on Earth. It's absolutely unreal what Rhino can do. So what we're doing here is a piece of cake. Now is probably a good time to mention that what I'm doing here is sort of a random mix of things that I've made up and clever things that I've seen students do. You totally might find better or faster ways of doing this. I would love to hear about them. Don't feel like this is absolutely the only way to go. I like how many similarities this has with real life. We're sort of trimming stuff out in the same way we would with the saw. We're assembling it based on the number key again. And now we're ready to treat this as an assembly and drop it over here on our stock. So let's do this. We're about done with the quote-unquote hard method. It was in a command there. I didn't want to get into it. Alright, so let's deal with this. Do you see this funny business where the background is showing through? That's happening because as far as Rhino's concerned, you have two surfaces that are in exactly the same location. This glitchy, crazy, static look. That's Rhino letting you know that hey, you've got two things that are in exactly the same location in terms of height, in terms of the z-axis. So two ways we can get around that. If we know that this is exactly where we want our part to go, so let's drag a selection box here, and yeah, I wanted to cover up that knot. We can go ahead and use the trim command, only now we'll just be trimming out the stuff that's underneath here. So I'm going to turn off the visibility of the surfaces. I'll make print layer active. I'm going to use these as cut lines again, because ultimately that's what they are, they're cut lines. Okay, so I have to turn on surfaces, parent layer. I'm going to turn off walnut and copper. Enter the trim command. Select my cutting objects. And I'm going to click in here. Right click when I'm done. I can turn back on the visibility of copper and walnut. And I'm going to turn off the print. I want to get rid of the grain lines and the numbers there. So, isn't this crazy? There my feet are and everything. This is true to life, pretty much the best possible planning you could ever do, as far as I understand it. If you can think of a way to make this even more pedantic, you know I would love to hear about it. Let's say, for example, we wanted to solve the, without trimming this piece out, maybe we wanted the ability to move this around in front of a client, let's say, and we wanted to solve that static, like two surfaces existing in one location kind of situation. So I'm going to do a Control-Z. Okay, so I undid that trim. I'm going to turn back on walnut and copper. We'll get into perspective here shortly. So I am not happy with these surfaces disappearing and reappearing into each other. Rather than cut an actual hole in my substrate and sort of permanently choose where this is going to go, I can also go to perspective, and I can solve the problem of these two surfaces existing at exactly the same height in the z-axis, the vertical, the height direction. All those things are selected. I'm going to turn on gumball. This blue arrow here, pointing directly up, perpendicular to the image, that's the z-axis. I'm going to click that and type 0.001. That just raised my image 1/1000th of an inch above this surface here. I should say it raised my my inlay 1/1000th of an inch above the image of the background. And so now I've got no problems with scooting it around and having the surfaces sort of blur into each other and get funky. So let's turn off the print layer. Probably not a bad idea to go ahead and make this into a group, because ultimately it will be a group, right? It'll be glued together, it'll just be one component. We'll be wiggling this around, maybe rotating it, deciding how we want it to be, how it's all going to go. So let's assume for a second we've done this with crazy computer precision. Okay, you know, filing work happens, we don't want to take forever putting these things together. There's always going to be a little bit of glue there, who knows, there's going to be a gap. So let's actually represent that gap. Let's say that we know we're going to have slight gaps everywhere and we're fine with it in this organic design, and we're going to glue it in with black glue. So the quickest and easiest way to go about that is I'm just going to turn back on the print layer. We have these grain lines here. I basically just need to find the quickest and easiest way to turn off the visibility of these numbers and these grain lines here. So what I'm going to do is, there's no need to have parts on. There's no need to have anything on except for the print layer and the surface layers. I'm going to get the background surface out of my way just so I can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to ungroup. I need to repeat that a few times because I've got a few groups going on. I'm going to do SELTEXT, select text. It's important to note that it just selected all the text in the entire Rhino space. I'm only interested in either deleting or hiding this text over here. So now that I've just selected all text in the whole Rhino space, if I hold Control, that's to remove things from the selection, and drag a giant selection box out here where I'm not concerned, I just narrowed my selection to only text that's right there, and I could delete it. I'm going to choose to hide it with the light bulb up here. I can also type in the word hide. Show is the opposite of that command. If I right-click the light bulb, it will show things that are hidden, and I'm going to hide it. I'm going to take advantage of another interesting selection method, and rather than having to come in here, notice that group was retained through the hiding. Rather than come in here and have to select all these lines, I'm going to do an SEL closed CRV, closed curve. Again, that just selected all the closed curves in the entire Rhino space. If I hold Control, drag a selection box, deselect all these ones that I don't want to be deleting. I lost the thread there. These are not actually closed curves, the ones that I'm trying to select. So I'll click off in the gray. I'm going to do select curves. That will select all of them. I can hold Control and drag selection boxes out here where it's convenient. Okay, I'm running into some grouping issues here. I didn't hit ungroup enough times. Just hitting the Enter key repeatedly, breaking all these groups. Now I can come in, hold Control while dragging these boxes to just deselect anything that touches the box. Just taking care to not get rid of these lines. I'm going to go ahead and hide them. Oh. I accidentally right-clicked and showed the previous one, so I did a Control-Z. Now they're hidden. I can turn background back on. And this is pretty darn reasonable. This sort of assumes that I'm doing a really good job with my file work. And I've just got a fine black line between all my components here. And at this point, I'm ready to kind of save this as a JPEG. The infamous thing about dealing with all this stuff, dealing with dropping these images here, if we wind up applying materials to the material column, as we will in the next method, they get lost when you send your file to me, so that's why I'm so insistent upon a JPEG happening. So what we're going to do, now that it looks right, I don't really see any need to cut out the feet there. I find that to be kind of interesting. This is hopefully really similar to how my inlay is going to look all said and done. I'm happy with it. I'm going to just do the sort of cheapest and easiest thing that we can possibly do, and I'm going to do screen capture to file. And I'm going to just save this as render. And I'm saving it in the same place where my Rhino file is stored, where my stock images are stored, and where my starting image was stored. That just kind of keeps everything logical. So we just made an object, or we just made a file, an item, that is not part of the Rhino file. It is a JPEG. It is an image. It's just like the same as the image you saved off the internet as your starting point. And that is what I'm going to be asking you to send me. So I'm going to go and find that. Render. This is perfect. This is a render. This is everything that I think a render ought to be. And this is the quote-unquote render JPEG that will be due with your file. So that is the first method, and I will tell you, having just done it and having to explain everything and record it, it was really not too bad, and I'm going to go ahead and say it's barely harder than the method I'm about to show you. And as you can see, it's a crazy planning tool. There's really no limit to how much detail you can control here. Like, I can get right down into the level of, like, I know for a fact that this pour is going to be very close to that location. So let's assume that I'm happy with this and everything looks good. I am happy with it. Everything does look good. I'm happy. And let's deal with this stuff that we had left earlier. Now I'm going to take advantage of my stock layers. You're going to notice some similarities here. My parts layers, all the names and different materials that are going to be there are under parts layers. They're sort of copied under the surface layers, the names anyways, and they're also copied under the parts layers. I'm sorry, they're copied under the stock layers. So if we have light, dark, and background parts, we're going to have light, dark, and background surfaces, and we're going to have light and dark stock. Probably won't need the background stock because we are not going to be gluing a pattern onto the background. We're going to be scribing around with a knife. So I'll make that visible. With my copper stock layer active, I'm going to enter the polyline command. I'm going to go from here to here. Now with my walnut stock active, I go from here to here. And I'm going to choose to just kind of quickly go around the place where it's already missing. So what did we just do here? We have given ourselves, I can turn surfaces off now, we've given ourselves extremely useful information to put on the print layer. We no longer want this random group that goes down, as I've previously demonstrated. Just kind of stick it on the stock, make sure the cut lines are not hanging off the edge of the stock. We now have complete and utter control over how the grain is going to be in this material. And if we print this, I'm going to go ahead and hide this as well just to show you the print. Control P. I'm a stickler for this line being printed. I feel like that's wasted ink, so I'm going to turn off paper. Control P. Make sure that we're printing 1:1 under the View Output and Scale options. What we're going to have here on our piece of paper is a line that represents the periphery of the copper, a line that represents the periphery of the walnut, and a key to put all these pieces together once we've sawn them all out and we're looking at just a pile of parts with numbers. And as you might imagine, having this located here means that I can hold this up to the light and get really super particular about where this cut pattern winds up on the stock. And it's positively magical. It's absolutely worth all the effort that I just showed you to wind up with this level of control and maximizing your yields, knowing where your grain is going to wind up, avoiding knots, all the things that I've mentioned. It's truly marvelous. I did not come up with the bulk of this. I think a student who wanted to be more pedantic than me came up with this, and I absolutely loved it. I adopted it, and this is what I do now, and it's fantastic. I want to level with you. If you're new to Rhino, if you're new to Rhino this semester, I know for a fact that what you've just watched is horrifying. I know that it's terrible. It's way too much information. It's gonna feel that way for the first couple moves that you make. I would recommend just taking it slow. Don't hesitate to rewind the video a million times and just kind of take it step by step. and take advantage of snaps. Be mindful of right-clicking and left-clicking, and just try to duplicate exactly what I did. And I think you will come to find after you do it once, it just becomes second nature. We're using the trim command, we're using the scale command, we're using the rotate command, and other than that, it's kind of just a matter of being diligent and going through the process and getting it all going on. I hope you can see the utility in what has happened here and how much more control we're going to have by having done this. So let's talk about method number 2. It is going to be a little bit easier, perhaps. We're going to have to deal with some settings and stuff that you may find more frustrating, you may find it easier. Rather than dealing with these pieces individually and cutting them out and reassembling the flower, we're just going to sort of control things by layer. So every surface that we create, that we're about to create on this layer, we're just going to go ahead and apply a material to it. So the plus side of this is, to be honest with you, if I was doing a 50-piece inlay, I would consider using method 1, as we've shown. If I were doing like a 200-piece inlay, I might be tempted. My pieces are so small, I'm less concerned with grain orientation. I might be tempted to use the method number 2 that we're about to talk about. I'm a little bit remiss to even show this method because it's going to be a little bit different for you Mac users. The same trickery can be done. We're going to really take a major shortcut here, and we're not taking advantage of what Rhino's capable of. We're just using it in its simplest, easiest possible way. I know that this cheat that we're about to do can be done on a Mac, but I have not yet tracked anyone down who uses Rhino 6 on a Mac, so I don't have a precise write-up on how it's done on a Mac. I know it can be done. If you can't figure out how to make it happen on a Mac, use method 1. So let's go ahead and just turn on our parts. I didn't wind up deleting anything and using the first method, so we'll just check them out side by side. I think that'll be interesting. So in the same way that we had to bring in a surface and then cut it up to assemble this, we need to create some surfaces in here. So I'm going to turn off grain orientation and numbers. I am going to have to make some surfaces, but I won't need to trim or reassemble or do anything like that. So pros and cons. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the picture layer also. So we're just looking at parts here. Unlock the parts layer. And in the same way that we sort of had the tracing layer visible and we used the curve boolean command to systematically populate the light parts by clicking inside the light parts, same thing with the dark parts, curve boolean command clicked inside the dark parts. It's critical that you have this going on. Only the light parts are on the light parts layer. Only the dark parts are on the dark parts layer, so on and so forth. We're going to use these layers, we're going to have them be visible and use them to populate the corresponding surface layer. So I'm going to turn on light parts and light parts only. I'm going to make active light surfaces, and I'm going to use the planar surface command. So that's planar srf. It's going to say select the curves to build a surface. Press enter when done. As per usual, I like to confirm that what I'm about to do is going to go to the right layer. We are making a surface that is going to represent the parts here, and it's about to go to the corresponding surface layer. Okay, that can be a little bit underwhelming. I'm going to go to shaded for now. So now we know that we have surfaces there. I'm going to repeat this and be real systematic about it. It may seem like overkill in this simple example, but as soon as you get into 5, 10, 20 colors, the only way to keep your sanity is to be really legitimate about this. You'll have a parts layer for each one of those species or colors that you're working with. This is copper, this is bronze, this is walnut, this is maple, and you'll have those exact same names down here. You've got to keep legit with this or it will become nightmarish on you. I'm going to turn off the light surfaces. I'm going to turn off the light parts. I'm going to turn on dark parts, and dark surfaces is active. I'm going to repeat this. Planar surface. There we go. Now is probably a good time to mention why we bothered drawing the background rectangle back when we were initially tracing. We never actually made a part from this. I wanted to keep the previous video a little shorter, so let's go ahead and make a background part. If you'll recall, I'll turn on background parts, turn off everything else, turn off the surfaces. Background parts is empty, and now we're at a point where we're going to need to fix that using this method. So a little throwback to when we were making our parts. The part layer is active. We're about to make background. We're going to turn on the tracing layer. We're going to get into the curve Boolean command. Select all the curves. Delete input none, combine regions no. Right click when we are ready, when we know we have all the curves we want. Click inside the regions. We're just going to click inside the background. Before I right click and pull the trigger on this command, background parts is where this object is about to be made. So there we go. Let's see what we just did by turning off the tracing layer. So this is our background. There we have our light parts. I'm going to change this color yet again. Really take advantage of the layers to make things easier for me. There we have light parts fitting into the background, dark parts fitting into the background, and we are ready to proceed with making a background surface. So remember, we made our dark parts, our dark surfaces rather, our light surfaces. We're ready to make a background surface. And same thing, we're going to have the background parts visible and nothing else. Background surfaces active, because that's where we want our surface to go. Get into the planar surface command just by typing it in. Select all the curves that you got there on that parts layer. And there's something awesome that's going to happen here. Rhino is smart enough to know that if there's a curve within another curve, it's because you don't want this material. If I were to, for example, let me do a Control-Z. If I accidentally think I'm going to run the planar surface command on this and then run it on this separately, it will cover stuff up. So this is yet another reason why it's critical that you be keeping track of parts layers going on, parts only going on their corresponding parts layer. It makes this really, really a piece of cake to keep organized once you're dealing with a really complicated image. A given parts layer visible, the corresponding surface layer active. Select all the parts, make a planar surface, and output it to the surface layer, the corresponding surface layer, and it's just the only way to stay sane. I'm going to share with you a strong preference that I have, and this is something I noticed in a few files I received. I really find it confusing and don't recommend that you label your parts by what it actually is. If, for example, you were doing a face, I do not recommend having like an eyes layer and a mouth layer and a teeth layer. I always find that to just lead to major confusion. You want to organize it by sort of color value, if you will. Even in the initial stages, if you don't know what the materials are going to be, don't call it the eye, the teeth, the mouth, the nose, the ears. Call it the light parts, the medium parts, the dark parts. Call it the white parts, the brown parts, the shiny parts, the dull parts, whatever you want to do, but organize it by material, not by the actual physical component that you're tracing. And what this will save you from, just a basic example off the top of my head, is if you have an eyes layer and a teeth layer, and they both wind up being white, it makes needless work for you, and you have extra layers going on here when a single white layer would have sufficed for both the whites of the eyes and the whites of the teeth. So do what you want to do to stay organized, but I would strongly recommend you organize by color or species or material, and don't organize by this is the window of the car, or this is the teeth and this is the eyes, that sort of thing. My personal preference. So I want to change some colors here just so I can see what's actually going on. Okay. So I did actually undo my background surface. So we'll just repeat this one more time. You're going to want to do the same thing every time and just be really regular about it. I'm looking at a background part layer, the background part layer. It's visible. Background surfaces is active. select everything on the parts layer, planar surface. There we go. I'm going to change the color of that just so we can see that we've got everything. So now would be a decent time to turn your image back on, and it will be pretty clear if, for example, you failed to make this part. Notice how we're seeing Rhino space back in there. That's a clear indicator that you traced a part that you never actually got onto a parts layer. You never made a surface of it. It's not going to make it onto your print layer, and you're going to wind up short a part, and that can be a big bummer. So this is a pretty helpful time to realize, like, hey, I didn't actually make this into a part. I traced it. It's part of my design. The other components around it are responding to the fact that it's there, but I didn't actually make it into a part. I'm just going to Control Z that. You know what? Actually, let's fix that. Let's say you get to this point and you come to find, oh my gosh, I didn't actually make that into a part. I'm going to turn off surfaces. Let's go all the way. I never actually made it into a part, and I didn't catch it until this point, and man, that's a big bummer. Do I have to start over? Do I hit Control Z 1,000 times and go back? No. What I can do is just recognize that, okay, that part did not wind up existing. That's a big problem. Yeah, totally missing a part there. Unacceptable. So what I'm going to do to fix that is I can turn on my image and go, yeah, that's a light part. It's a light part that I lost, so light parts is going to be the parts layer that needs to be active. I'm going to turn back on my tracing layer, turn off picture. Made a mental note of that's the one that I'm missing. Enter the curve boolean command. Select everything. Press enter when done. I got to click inside that region that was missing. Make sure that it's outputting to the right layer. Right click. Okay, we just made it. So we're one step closer to being back where we wanted to be. Turn off tracing. Let's go ahead and turn back on our surface layers. Yep, that is the one that's lacking. I know that the light parts layer is green, so I can select this curve here. I'm going to make light surfaces active, because that's the surface that's missing. It's a light surface. Planar surface. Okay, we're back in the game. Now that we have these surfaces, we have something that Rhino can project a texture onto, a color onto, and in our case, it will project an image onto it. If all you have is curves, this can be a little bit maddening. People will skip the making of surfaces. If you apply a material to this layer, these lines have no thickness, and there's nowhere for that color to, or texture or image to be, and nothing will happen. You simply won't get an image, so you can't skip the surface making. And for reasons that will soon become apparent, it's absolutely essential that they wind up on their corresponding layers, because we're going to make everything that lives on the copper layer appear to be copper. Same thing with walnut, same thing with the background. So let's go ahead and populate this thing. So here we're going to take a big cheat, and we're looking at the light, or the copper layer rather. We've decided we're going to try copper at this point, and we're going to go over to the material column. Click that. Your computer, or when you downloaded Rhino, it's going to be a little bit different for everyone, particularly if you're a Mac or a PC user. Rhino sometimes comes with all kinds of interesting materials. They reflect light. You can get glass and plastic and paint and metal and grass and brick and concrete and blacktop and all sorts of interesting things. Their choices of wood tend to be pretty weak. So what I'm going to actually recommend that we do is just stick with the default material, which is just white matte plaster, and we're going to go to custom. Here's where we're going to do something that would make a Rhino rendering expert cringe. We're going to cheat, and we're going to trick a color, or I'm sorry, we're going to trick an image to come in here as though it's a color. I want to show that one more time. I'm looking at the copper surface layer, clicking in the material column. I'm going to go to Type, go to Custom, Color down here. I'm going to click to assign texture. You Mac people, I'm sorry, but this is just going to look a little bit different, but ultimately you're looking to click to assign a color. This is going to let us travel to our sort of browser window, and it knows where I like to go. These are all images that I just found online or snapped with my cell phone if I wanted to get particular. And if, let's say for example, you're working with a new wood and you've never worked with it before, if you don't want to go through the hassle of taking a picture with your cell phone and getting a real accurate representation of your grain and the color and everything, just type in whatever species you're looking for, grain. So walnut grain, just Google image search, and I would probably recommend hunting for a large image. I'm going to try to avoid any of this stuff with the watermark on it, and I'm also going to avoid anything that is not one, like wall to wall, edge to edge walnut grain and nothing else. If you wind up selecting an image that has a ruler in it, or it has someone's thumb holding a cutting board, you're going to see a very unpleasant effect where you're going to see like 100 of that thumb sort of tiled across your Rhino surfaces. So that's a beautiful piece of wood, but this will look like pure madness if you attempt to use that as the image that we're about to import here. So you want to find something that's pretty boring. That almost looks like it's computer generated itself. I don't like the watermark there, but it's not horrible. You want to find something like so. Something simple, something that you can imagine if this thing was copied to its left and to its right and above and below, is it going to look continuous, or is there going to be someone's thumb repeated 1,000 times in there? So just find whatever grain you're looking for. Texture is another good word to use here. Purple heart texture, Osage orange texture or grain, and try to find things that are large or high resolution. That'll benefit you. So I've already got some of these. I'm selecting my light parts. And I don't think I actually have copper handy, so I'm going to select swirled brass. So swirled brass is now the color that this surface thinks it's going to be. And underwhelming yet again. We totally just put swirled brass here, but nothing happened. We must go to rendered, the rendered view mode in our viewport up here. So if you click up in the little arrow next to your top, go to rendered, you can see all that white matte stuff has come to life. We haven't assigned those things yet, but we've got swirled brass and it's looking decent. We're now going to go ahead and assign the walnut. Again, looking at the walnut surface layer, going over to the material column, clicking there, type, custom, click to assign texture under the color heading, and I'm looking for walnut. Here we go. Okay, you can see how this is not going to look as good. The grain is all kind of flowing in the same direction. You can see some definite duplication here. This is just the price we pay for being able to have it go to all the parts in one shot. Now we need a background. So I'll click in the material column of the background surfaces layer. Same deal, just rinse and repeat. Custom, click to assign a texture, and I'm not sure if I actually have. Yeah, let's try some purple heart. Okay. So the background likes to go white when you're in rendered mode. I find these part lines to be pretty unsatisfactory. I don't like seeing the red and the green and teal and blue and whatever. I could switch these to being black. In fact, I think I will, just for a direct comparison against what we did before. The quickest and easiest thing to do would be to simply turn off the parts layer. Now those lines went away. But just so we have a direct comparison here, I'm going to go ahead and turn both of these parts layers to black. Alright. You can see that this is, it's acceptable. It was pretty fast and easy, as long as you're kind of familiar with going through the motions here, and you've got to find images of your material. Either take those pictures yourself, or go and find some high-res ones on Google Images. And as I said before, as far as this being the actual material we're working with, in the actual scale that's going to exist in, with the actual features, grain lines, chatoyance, figure in the wood, figure in the pearl, what have you, we don't have any of that, but you know, it's acceptable. This is still 1,000 times better than a napkin sketch in terms of it being a sales tool. If you're showing someone what you can do, what your options are, this could be brass, this could be copper, it could be this big, it could be this big. This is going to be 1,000,000 times better than anything you're going to do with, you know, pencil and paper, as far as getting someone to see your vision of why you want them to give them your money. So at this point, you can do the exact same. This render is complete. You can do that same screen capture to file. And I'm going to call this one render 2. And I'm just saving it as a JPEG. That's the default. And that will just capture everything within the viewport. So that is the rendering process. I'll just level with you one more time. It stinks the first time you do it. I'm sure that felt like drinking from the fire hose attempting to watch this video and imagining yourself doing all that nonsense. Just stick with it. Watch the video as much as you need to get this process down. I'm always open to receiving questions, text messages. You know, get my input, get my help. I'm happy to help with this. And yeah, I think that concludes how to deal with a render. Thank you for your time.